Imagine a world consumed by fear, a world where the very air is thick with anxiety, and the faces of people reflect a deep, unshakable dread. This is not a distant dystopian future but a very real possibility that looms over us. The skies above India and Pakistan erupt in blinding flashes. These flashes are not the harbingers of a festive celebration, but rather the ominous signals of a catastrophic event unfolding. The night sky, once a canvas of serene darkness, is now lit by the terrifying glow of explosions. These are not the fireworks of celebration, but the terrifying dawn of nuclear war. The unthinkable has happened. The cities once bustling with life and activity are now under siege, their skylines marred by the destructive power of nuclear explosions. Two nations driven by decades of animosity have unleashed the destructive power of the atom. The historical tensions between India and Pakistan have reached a boiling point, culminating in a devastating conflict that threatens not just the region, but the entire world. Within seconds, mushroom clouds, harbingers of death, rise above bustling cities. These ominous clouds signify the end of normalcy, casting a shadow of death and destruction over everything in their path. The once vibrant urban landscapes are now scenes of utter devastation. The very air becomes toxic, filled with radioactive dust and debris. The atmosphere, once a source of life, is now a deadly cocktail of pollutants. People are forced to wear masks not just to protect against pollution, but to shield themselves from the invisible, insidious threat of radiation. The ground trembles with the force of 1,000 earthquakes. The sheer power of the explosions sends shock waves through the earth, causing buildings to shake and the ground to heave as if in agony. Buildings crumble and entire populations are vaporized in an instant. The infrastructure that took decades to build is reduced to rubble in mere moments. The human cost is unimaginable, with countless lives snuffed out in the blink of an eye. This is not a scene from a science fiction film, it's a terrifying glimpse into a potential future if tensions continue to escalate. The apocalyptic imagery we often see in movies could become our reality if we do not take immediate action to de-escalate the situation. The consequences of such a conflict would be felt far beyond the borders of India and Pakistan. The ripple effects of a nuclear war would spread across the globe, affecting countries and communities thousands of miles away. It's a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of our world, where actions have global repercussions. In our modern, interconnected society, the actions of one nation can have far-reaching impacts on the entire world. The global economy, international relations, and even the environment would all be affected. The human cost would be immeasurable, but the environmental and economic fallout would also be catastrophic, plunging the entire world into chaos. The environmental damage would be unprecedented, with radioactive contamination rendering large areas uninhabitable. The economic impact would be equally severe, with global markets crashing and economies plunging into deep recessions. This is the nightmare scenario we must strive to prevent. The dark clouds of war and destruction loom over us, but it is within our power to change this course. We must act now to prevent this nightmare from becoming a reality. It's a call to action for leaders and citizens alike to choose dialogue over destruction, diplomacy over devastation. The path to peace is not easy, but it is the only way to ensure a future for our planet. Leaders must come together to negotiate and find peaceful solutions to conflicts. The future of our planet, the very survival of our species, may depend on it. We must remember that we are all inhabitants of the same planet, and our collective actions will determine the fate of our world. By choosing peace and cooperation, we can build a brighter, more hopeful future for generations to come. The initial impact of a nuclear exchange between India and Pakistan would be nothing short of apocalyptic. The sheer magnitude of destruction unleashed in mere moments would be unprecedented in human history. Major cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Karachi, and Islamabad, home to tens of millions, would be instantly reduced to rubble. Iconic landmarks, bustling markets, and residential areas would be obliterated, leaving behind a haunting landscape of twisted metal and shattered concrete. The death toll would be staggering, likely exceeding hundreds of thousands if not millions in the first few hours alone. Emergency responders, if they survive, would be overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the catastrophe, struggling to provide aid amidst the chaos. Those who survived the initial blasts and searing heat would face a horrifying new reality. The psychological trauma of witnessing such devastation, coupled with the loss of loved ones, would leave deep emotional scars. They would be left to navigate a landscape transformed into a radioactive wasteland. The once thriving urban centers would become ghost towns, with radiation levels making them uninhabitable for years, if not decades. Hospitals, overwhelmed and ill-equipped to handle such a crisis, would be unable to cope with the sheer number of casualties. Makeshift medical facilities would spring up, but they would be woefully inadequate, lacking the necessary supplies and personnel to treat the injured. Basic necessities like food, water, and medical supplies would be scarce, leading to further suffering and death. People would be forced to scavenge for whatever they could find, often risking exposure to radiation in the process. The lucky ones would be those far from the blast zones. In rural areas, the immediate physical damage might be less severe, but the ripple effects of the disaster would still reach them. But even they would not be spared the consequences. Communities would gather to discuss the fallout effects, sharing whatever information they could find and trying to prepare for the long-term challenges ahead. Radioactive fallout, carried by wind currents, would contaminate vast areas, poisoning water sources and making the air itself dangerous to breathe. The invisible threat of radiation would loom large, affecting both urban and rural populations. The long-term health effects, including cancer and birth defects, would continue to plague survivors for generations to come. The genetic damage caused by radiation exposure would be passed down, affecting the health and well-being of future generations. This grim picture underscores the horrifying reality of nuclear war. The immediate devastation is only the beginning. The long-term consequences would be felt for decades, if not centuries. It's a stark warning against complacency and a reminder of the urgent need for peace and disarmament. The international community must come together to prevent such a catastrophe from ever occurring. The consequences are simply too dire to contemplate, let alone experience. The world must heed this warning and work tirelessly to ensure that nuclear weapons are never used again. The future of humanity depends on it. Beyond the immediate devastation and loss of life, a nuclear conflict would trigger a cascade of environmental consequences, potentially plunging the entire planet into a state known as nuclear winter. The massive explosions would loft millions of tons of soot and smoke high into the atmosphere, blocking out the sun's rays and causing temperatures to plummet. This artificial winter could last for months, if not years, with devastating consequences for agriculture. Crops would fail, leading to widespread famine. The global food supply chain would collapse, impacting even those countries far from the initial conflict. The interconnectedness of our world means that no nation would be immune to the fallout. The environmental consequences wouldn't end there. The depletion of the ozone layer would expose the Earth's surface to harmful ultraviolet radiation, further endangering human health and ecosystems. The planet's delicate climate equilibrium would be disrupted, leading to unpredictable and potentially catastrophic weather patterns. The concept of nuclear winter is a chilling reminder that the consequences of nuclear war extend far beyond the immediate blast zones. It's a threat not just to India and Pakistan, but to the entire planet and all its inhabitants. The economic and social ramifications of a nuclear conflict between India and Pakistan would be felt far and wide, plunging the region into chaos. The immediate aftermath would see cities reduced to rubble, and the once bustling streets would be eerily silent, save for the cries of the injured and the desperate. The economies of both countries, already grappling with numerous challenges, would collapse entirely. Factories would shut down, unable to operate without power or workers. Shops would close their doors, their shelves empty, and their owners gone. The once thriving markets would become ghost towns. Trade would grind to a halt as transportation networks crumble and fear paralyzes global markets. Highways would be littered with abandoned trucks, ports would stand empty, and railroads would be silent. The global supply chain, already fragile, would be shattered, leading to shortages and economic turmoil worldwide. The mass displacement of people fleeing radiation, seeking medical attention, or simply searching for food and water would create a refugee crisis of unprecedented scale. Families would be torn apart, with parents desperately searching for their children amidst the chaos. Camps would overflow, unable to provide even the most basic necessities. Neighboring countries already struggling with their own problems would be ill-equipped to handle the influx of millions of desperate people. Border crossings would be overwhelmed, and shelters would be packed beyond capacity. The strain on these nations would be immense, leading to tensions and potential conflicts. The strain on resources, infrastructure, and social services would be immense, potentially leading to further instability and conflict. Hospitals would be unable to cope with the sheer number of injured and sick, Schools would be overcrowded and people would queue for hours just to get a loaf of bread or a bottle of water. The social fabric of the region would be torn apart. Communities that once thrived on mutual support and cooperation would be fractured, with trust eroded and social cohesion shattered. The streets would be filled with mourning as people grieve for lost loved ones and the life they once knew. The psychological trauma inflicted on survivors, particularly children, would be profound and long-lasting. The young, who should be the hope for the future, would be haunted by nightmares and memories of the horrors they witnessed. Trauma counseling sessions would be overwhelmed, struggling to provide the necessary support. The loss of loved ones, homes, and livelihoods would create a generation scarred by the horrors of war. People would sift through the rubble of their former lives, clinging to memories and mementos of a time before the devastation. Makeshift memorials would dot the landscape, a testament to the lives lost and the pain endured. The cycle of poverty, violence, and despair would be difficult to break. As resources become scarce, crime and violence would rise, with people fighting over the little that remains. Slums and shantytowns would expand, filled with those who have lost everything and have nowhere else to turn. The economic and social collapse in the aftermath of a nuclear conflict would be a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of our world. Stock markets would crash, and headlines around the globe would scream of the disaster. International trade centers would stand empty, a symbol of the broken global economy. The consequences of such a conflict would not be confined to India and Pakistan. They would reverberate throughout the region and the world. Global protests would erupt, demanding action and support for the affected. International efforts to support refugees would be launched, and diplomatic discussions at the UN would intensify, seeking solutions to prevent further catastrophe.